Right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another live stream. Thank you for watching and being part of all of this. Just before we get to our special guest this evening, I just want to go through the do's and don'ts, all the things that you have to be paying attention to. So if you're watching on Facebook, share, like it. If you're watching on YouTube, then share, subscribe, make sure that notification bell is hit. You can find all my other social media links below. Do make sure you follow them, especially you can see them running across there. BitChute, Odyssey, brand YouTube, they're all there. Make sure that you're following me on them, because we have to break the big tech cartels. We have to accept the fact that if we want free speech, we're gonna have to find it in other places, folks. So it's all very well to be here, but regardless, whilst you are here for the next 60 minutes, thumbs up if you like what you're saying, of what you're hearing. And if you don't, then why are you here? So thumbs up, right? Last but not least, I'd like you to, of course, remember this is all brought to you care of altnewsmedia.net, and that's where you can go, hit the donate button, drop a pound in the hat, or whatever you can afford. Right, I think that's pretty much the introductions done. So, but we have to keep reminding you about these things because, as I say, we do need to just liberate ourselves from big tech and the monopolists and scenarios that they occupy. Okay, right. Okay, it's a real pleasure to have my next guest on the channel. So without further ado, can we I'd like to introduce Niall McCrae. Yeah, and here he is.
Good evening, David. And good evening to everyone tuning in.
How are you? It's been, as we were saying just before we went live, it's been well, it seems actually, it has been a while actually since we spoke last. Doesn't seem like it, but so much happens, doesn't it? So yeah. It's good to see you. And sorry.
It's a strange phenomenon that we're all stuck at home, and COVID time seems to go faster for some reason. That's what I find.
Oh, yeah, honestly, there's not enough hours in the day. That's the and yet, isn't it? It's strange actually. That's an interesting point because in a way we've like frozen an aspect in some ways, but then in other ways there's just so much to discuss. Probably, I look back to pre-COVID times and it's sort of like a strange world. What did we talk about then? Things like Brexity things and immigration-y things and other things. Now those are all luxuries, aren't they? Really indulgent,
yes. They were decadent times, weren't they?
Yeah, they were. Yeah. Well, that preceded the fall of Rome, of course, and here we are in the last days. But what I really like is now you've been very busy, obviously, in your writings and your commentary, and I want to bring up talk about two of your articles actually, but I wanted to show you a picture just to start to kick off with. I just wanted to check. This is a picture of, because everyone's going back down the pub. I just wanted to check. Are you pictured in this one here? Is that you in the top left-hand corner there in the booth? I'm not sure. Hey, welcome to dystopia. Look at that. Seriously, what do you say? I mean, laughter is the right response. I don't think that was a spoof photo. I think it may have been, but who knows? In clown world, nothing you can be sure of. But I saw that image, and then of course I wanted to get to your article because that's the funny side of it. But it's not necessarily that funny. So this is a great article, folks, which you should definitely all check out. If we could just bring it up and then we'll chat about it. So this was over on Unity News with my friends over there, David and the gang. And here's another, this ain't normal, folks. Gotta tell you, doesn't matter what Morris and the gang tell you. And anyway, this is the article that you wrote, which is really good article. Why I will not be returning to the pub next week. What a grouch you are. Why aren't you going down the boozer, getting a pint? Explain yourself, if you will, please.
Well, I'm very fond of the British pub and also of real ale, which is something which you can't really get in other parts of the world. And I have my local pubs that I frequent, and I feel some loyalty towards. I recognise that pubs have been a threatened species for some time. Before COVID,
Yep.
and wherever I go in Britain, I always inspect the taverns and take in the atmosphere. The British pub is a wonderful thing, but sadly, it's not appreciated by some segments of society. It's not appreciated so much by the younger generations, which is very sad.
Mm.
Younger generations are drinking less and less, and it's not just because there's a higher proportion of Muslim teetotalers. There's this kind of
Yep.
woke sort of puritanism about alcohol. So if you go to a pub, then you're not going to see many people in early 20s unless you go to a kind of trendy high street bar. But your local traditional pubs, they don't attract the younger people. So I've always felt that it's important for us to support this very valuable item of social capital. But in the COVID regime, pubs are not being allowed to run as pubs. They're being run as nurseries with rules, with strict discipline about
Yep.
who's allowed in, how many are allowed in, what you're allowed to do, and we've effectively got a naughty corner, that sort of thing. They're not the places that you used to go to for a convivial, relaxing atmosphere. The way that they've been reopened as of Monday in England, I will not go near them. I am not going to sit outside. I'm not going to see fellow drinkers all wearing masks. I'm not going to have barmaids all wearing masks. I'm not going to identify myself when I enter the premises. I'm not going to be expected to divulge my personal medical information to the pub. And there's just a whole load of reasons why the pub, as they've reopened, would not appeal to me at all. I may go back on the 17th of May when we'll be allowed to sit inside at pubs again, but I will only go to one of those very few places where there's a properly tuned in landlord who doesn't want to do any of this COVID crap.
Well, three cheers for all of that. I completely agree. I think I think if we talk about just pubs for a moment, just focus on that aspect of it. I mean, you are right. Pubs are a kind of quintessential part of England. I think over here, in the Irish pubs, pretty big part of the Irish topography as well. But it is a thing. But then the NHS was the thing as well. And the government very effectively weaponized the NHS to get what they wanted. And so for me, one of the things here is that the way the English pubs are being reopened, it's like the government's, I'm sure their advisors have understand the attraction of the pub. So what they do is they've created this totally dystopian pub world where you go in and actually I fall at that. Well, if I was in England, I fall at the first hurdle. I'm not giving my medical. I'm not going to have a NHS track and or test and trace app on my phone. Am I right in thinking you've got that? Do you have to have that on your phone to get in or not? What's the story in that?
Okay, so if you look at the area where I live, a place called Carshalton on the southwest fringes of
Yep.
London, and
Yep.
there are still numerous traditional pubs, and the average age of the customers is probably in the 60s or higher. And what I think is interesting about the pub scene, the traditional pub scene, is I've noticed, I've observed that over the last 10, 20 years or so, there are not many of these locals who stay till the bell clangs at 20 to 11. They tend to drink in most numbers. They tend to drink in a sort of 5 to 7 p.m., that kind of window. So one of my local pubs that I have been, a loyal customer of for some time.
Yeah.
Occasionally, I've gone there for a drink at 8 o'clock in the evening, and I'm just about the only person there.
Right.
So the time of drinking has changed. So that, and I want to emphasize here that I'm not talking about all pubs. Obviously there are all these trendy pubs, gastro pubs. There's pubs in busy high streets and that sort of thing where they are busy. They've got maybe late licenses to 12, 1, 2 in the morning. I'm talking about the local traditional pubs. They're a threatened species.
Oh yeah, yeah.
They really are, and this was true before COVID. But the important thing, David, is that the government doesn't like pubs.
No.
They don't like pubs at all. They certainly don't like pubs while this COVID tyranny is running, because the last thing they want is people getting together, having a drink, speaking some home truths, revealing to each other how absurd and how wrong they think this regime is. The stupid rules, how the satire and irreverence that's already part of British drinking culture would be on steroids. The emperor would be called out for wearing no clothes. And the government doesn't want that. Look at the efforts they put into suppressing you, David, and fellow YouTubers for spreading what they call dangerous disinformation. Well, can you imagine the amount of dangerous disinformation that would go on in the pubs at this time? They don't want it.
Well, you're dead right. And actually, what one of our viewers does point out, pubs are where the revolution was planned in the US. And those are great points you're making. I mean, also, when people get a few drinks in them, they speak. My experience and literally individual, people speak freely, and that's great. And the one thing we're not allowed to. You're dead right. That's the one thing we're not allowed to do. We're not allowed to really say what we actually think about Boris and the government and all that's gone on over the past year, and the pubs, as you said. So it's a dangerous place really for the government, isn't it? But here's the thing as well. Like they've opened at the moment outside. If you got a beer garden, I know loads of pubs that don't have beer gardens. So I mean, they're shut. In fact, in Ireland, more or less, most pubs have been closed for like a year. Could you imagine what the economic damage that must be to the pubs, to their P&L? That must be devastating. A year. Doesn't matter what monies Rishi's throwing their way, through grants and stuff. They're still screwed financially, aren't they?
Well, clearly, with the furlough scheme in England being extended to September, clearly they were allowing businesses to stay shut. And I think only 40% of pubs have actually opened. And my guess is that some of the ones that have opened may actually just decide to close again, because it's very hard for them to make any kind of profit and to pay their staff. I mean, it's because remember that all these rules apply, David. They might have a small rear garden area, but you've got to have the social distancing. You've got to have the one-way systems, and it's just not viable for many pubs. So I'm not surprised a lot of them are staying closed, at least until the 17th of May.
Is it your expectation that on the 17th of May, they will be allowed to open indoors?
No. A friend of mine, who I've got very frustrated with, because as you, David, and I'm sure many of your people tuning in tonight will know, that all kinds of good, friendly, relationships have been marred by this COVID regime, because we kind of found out things about people that we didn't know. People that you thought were liberal, or you thought were libertarian, or you thought were conservative, or you thought were in good lefties in support of the working class man and woman. No, you find that lots of people are supporting this regime. And a friend of mine, who I've been a bit disappointed with, he told me off for sending him some links to articles about the COVID regime. And he sent me a chart, and it was like a chart from primary.
Okay. Okay, so I think we have a slight technical issue here, have we? That was going too well. Right, hang on. Yeah, so I think Niall has frozen on screen. So I think while Niall on freezes, which should happen shortly, I'll just I'll speak to you directly. I can do that, can't we? So but there has been this. The point Neil makes is a good one. This whole COVID thing has divided people up. Friends, family. It's been so divisive. And I guess ultimately, you fall on one side of the other. It's very hard to find a kind of a middle ground. I mean, I guess people like me and Neil and most of you, we are on the side that sees this as being a removal of our liberty and just not acceptable. And there's others out there who have been so scared. Number one, that group, they're so scared that they're just gonna they've bought into it, and they're going 100% all the way down the line with Boris. We trust Boris. By the way, I put up a video about another one today. I hope you watched that one. They trust Boris, and they believe Boris, and they think that if they follow the rules, if they're good model citizens, then that's fine. And this cuts across the political divide, as Neil was saying there. You have people who are left and right, and we now have common ground. Whereas I've got friends on the right that I'm now separated from. I think Neil's back. Hello, you're back.
Sorry about that. Gremlins in the works.
That'll be the Russians. Don't worry about that there. So you were making a good point there. So see if you can.
Sorry, folks. I just meant to say, this friend of mine sent me this chart, a sort of coloured chart, and it had 5 stages of the release from lockdown relating to drinking. And the first one was 6 people allowed to sit in a park, something like that. And the second one was the 12th of April, when the pub gardens open, and then the 17th of May, of course, when the pubs are open inside again. And he sent me this a few weeks ago, and I thought it's a bit pathetic, really, that we're celebrating being able to do things which should be our inalienable rights, really. But I also thought that this guy is being duped into thinking that is still being duped, even after a year, by government promises. All along, the government has been telling us they're going to do this, and then they do that instead. Now, the this that they promise is something that they need to keep us on board. But the that is what's already planned, and I think was planned from the outset. And I think what the governments around the world are being told is that there needs to be another lockdown. And of course, already we have lockdowns in France and Italy that have recently been reinstated. If you look at the COVID figures, now I don't believe any of the data that you get from the United Nations governments on COVID. It's all based on testing, and this virus still hasn't really been isolated. But if you take the figures that they present, then it's clear that there is another surge in cases in Europe, and you can guarantee that that will come here,
yeah,
and that will be used to go back on some of the promises for releasing us from lockdown. So
yeah.
I would predict, I may be made to look an idiot in a few weeks' time, but I would predict that there is going to be another lockdown, and it's not going to wait until October, as many people are predicting. No, they're going to lock down much sooner, because they need to do that to continue with the underlying agenda. And the underlying agenda is that they need everyone, or 95% of people, vaccinated. They need 95% of people on the vaccine passports. And this is the priority at the moment. Not, they'll tease us with things. So you can go back to Primark, you can go back to the pub, you can go back to the church, but they'll take them away very soon.
Just about everyone I've spoken to in the past number of days has said the same thing. They all believe that the next lockdown is coming, and it's really not very far away. Yeah. Initially, going back maybe a couple of months, I thought, right, we'll get out of jail maybe a wee bit in the summer, and then bang, it'll come in September. I don't think that anymore. I think that the steps are very carefully planned to make sure that we're going to be locked down in the summer. And it has to be the magical new variant. Maybe it'll be the South African variant, the super lethal one from South Africa, which AstraZeneca jabs are oddly not very efficacious against. It might be that. But, somebody says in the stream, by the way, but here's one for you. Like, you're talking about this as in a global context, and I completely get that. But I see there's someone on the stream here, find them, someone from America, a Brit living in America, and they're saying that in America, in the US, the pubs are open indoors. Most definitely in Florida, I think Texas, quite 22 states maybe, at least. It's like normal. So how do you reconcile that? How can we have Florida is a great example. I saw a short video of Fort Lauderdale, and I've been there. Maybe you've been there as well. And it looked brilliant because it looked normal. Packed bars, people having fun, no social distancing, no masks. And then I looked at this pathetic sham, which you've rightly written about, Niall, and I thought, how is the UK fallen into this state? Why are we so bad? And how are those US states so good? How's that?
Well, the US still has a system where states have a lot of autonomy, and let's not forget that most states in the US are red Republican states. They might have had the election stolen by basement Biden and his globalist crooks, behind the scenes.
Well, on YouTube, we can't say that, Niall. No. We have to remember YouTube that election it's the most genuine election I've ever seen.
No, you're right, David. David, it was fortified. It was fortified. Yeah.
Fortified. Yes, I forgot about that.
So these states are very interesting, aren't they? Places like Florida, Mississippi, and Texas, Republican states, and they're doing what they want. And of course, that's an embarrassment to the deep state, who would love to just shut everything down and have people wearing 2 or 3 masks and carry this on ad infinitum. But what we're seeing instead is that we have these free states, if you like, free states in America, that things are going almost back to normal, and they have COVID incidents lower than in the states that have maintained severe lockdowns, like New York. And that's difficult to hide in America. In Europe, um, the national media in countries across Europe is being very successfully controlled by the powers that be. And take France for example. France it instituted another national lockdown a few weeks ago, and the cases have risen because this is what lockdown does. Lockdown actually provides the conditions for the virus to spread. People are not getting out, keeping healthy, out in the fresh air. They're being stuck in their flats where they're spreading it more. Lockdown is a killer, literally a killer.
We,
But
yeah, we actually have, Neil. We've got one of our regulars. I see her on the stream here. I can bring her up. Donny girl, all the way from Hawaii. You're being watched from the Hawaiian Islands as we speak, and she says it's a blue state, but not as bad as New York because you need tourism. So actually, Donny girl. So has Hawaii opened up? She can answer this in the stream, but. Yeah, I mean, you see, but I see hope in the States. Here's the thing. I do see hope. I have to say, I hate to be so bleak on it. I don't see much hope here. I see people celebrating their captivity, celebrating. Your article was great because you've expressed what I feel, and I think a number of us feel. And a lot of them, or the media anyway, maybe it's the media. The media, the Sun, rags like the Sun and the Daily Mail, depending on the demographic they were after. Go and they were pretending it was all normal. And the only good scene I seen was, I think it was Soho in London, where clearly young people were just doing what young people do, and to hell with the regs, and they were mixing in numbers and stuff. But we have the dystopian being sold to us as normal, and it's so worrying that can happen here. Whereas if you look in Florida, it's normal. It's all normal, and I think I should maybe go and live in Florida. Actually, it feels better than this country at the moment.
Yeah. I've seen so many people saying that. Real patriots. People are proud of being British who no longer want to live here because it's not the country. They no longer recognize it. They no longer recognize their fellow citizens. They no longer recognize some of their friends and family members. They no longer recognize that their high streets, their pubs are, most of them still closed. And why are they here? Well, the trouble is that if you look across the English Channel to Europe, things are just as bad, if not worse, there. But there are places where there's freedom, and those places include some of those states in America, Florida, and South Dakota, for example. A few other places around the world, but not places that you would immediately want to go and up sticks, Belarus, for example. Until recently, Tanzania, but of course, Tanzania, there was the unfortunate death, shall we say?
Fortified death.
The fortified death of John Magufuli. Fortified.
Yeah. It's interesting. There's quite a few people on the stream. I mean, if there's anybody in Florida real estate wants to get in contact with me, I think I've lots of people who. But isn't it so blooming sad that, as you said, we are. Let's just be honest about this. We are the patriotic Brits. The people like yourself and me and those that follow us and whatnot. We were the full-blooded Brexiteers. We're the full-blooded. We love our country and all of these things. And now, as you say, it's become so unrecognizable. And it's so worrying because I don't know how it gets back. I visited a high street earlier today. Most of the shops we're still in lockdown 3 here. My hope is Northern Ireland will never get to lockdown 4 because we're never going to leave lockdown 3, right? It's up the high street. Pretty much all the shops were closed apart from if it's a pharmacy or bank. So it was Desolation Street. And people out happily, it was a lovely day here today, with their masks on in the sunshine. Some of them young, not all of them old, but so it was a mix. And I just, honestly, I watch it how do you feel? I watch it in horror when I see these things.
Yeah, I look at masked people with disdain now because
Yeah.
their obedience is prolonging this regime.
Yeah.
If people had refused to wear masks, enough people simply refused to do it,
Yeah.
then this regime would, well, not necessarily have been stopped in its tracks, but it would have been a major obstruction, wouldn't it? But when you think what they did, they deliberately did this gradually. So they started it on public transport, and then they moved it into shops.
Yeah.
And I believe that the reason for masking is nothing to do with the virus at all. I think that any reasonable scientist can see that wearing those disposable light blue masks that generally people wear are absolutely useless against the virons of COVID-19. Useless. It
Yeah.
really is like wearing a string vest to ward off mosquito bites.
Yeah.
And they know this. The scientific community knows this. What they'll try and argue, that the sort of scientific COVID zealots, is that they'll try and argue that it's one of a range of things that we do to reduce the risk. But they look. The reality is there's no strong evidence at all for wearing masks, and the studies have been done since then. The Danish study, for example, showing that they have almost useless. So why did they bring them in? I think they brought them in because it was a clear, visible sign of compliance.
Yeah.
And it's something that could be used against those who weren't compliant.
Yep. I absolutely agree. It's a very visible way also to differentiate between those who will do what Boris commands and those of us who don't. It's also psychological warfare. I was in a large garden center earlier today. I was very busy today. I was in a garden center as well, and there must have been, oh gosh, I don't know. I think the maximum capacity because of COVID regs is about 200 or 300, something like that. I was the only one without a mask. The only one.
Yes.
And even though I think I'm probably reasonably strong, but for all of that, you have all these emotions going through your head. I look at the masked sheep and I think, you're responsible for the pressure I have to feel. And they anger me, Neil. They anger me. But at the same time, you've still got all these choke points when you're going in, if you're challenged, all these things.
Yeah.
So it's really the government's. It's malicious in ways that I've got to be honest, I'd never seen. That they would do this till a percentage of the citizenry, you, me, probably a lot of people who watch this, who won't comply to things we consider to be.
Yes. It is. I think it's quite evil, the way that behavioral psychology has been used. I mean, it's literally behavioral psychological warfare against citizens. And I would never have imagined that this could happen in any of the civic democracies of Europe, certainly not in Britain. It's been really disconcerting how most of the people, I would say that the opinion polls that you get from the likes of YouGov are almost certainly rigged.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
But
yeah,
I think it is likely that there's probably at least half of society in Britain who just think this is right, think that we believe that we have this unprecedented virus, this unprecedented public health emergency, and that we need to do all these things to look after ourselves and look after other people and look after the high priests of the NHS.
Yeah. Well, actually, just on this, because this kind of leads us into the second article, which I know you've co-authored. I mean, there's so many tragic aspects to this, the whole scenario of what we're being put through by government. And so this excellent article appeared, if we could just bring it up, it was on Toby's Lockdown Skeptics. entitled I've been over that one, by the way. I've been over the Humber Bridge. You call it the Bridge to Nowhere. On a slightly humorous note on the serious topic, I'm a big Grimsby Town Football Club supporter. So I have a reason.
Really?
Yeah. So believe it, it's one of these little factoids about me. Lifelong Grimsby Town fan. So I've been up in that neck of the woods. So I know what it's like to travel over the Bridge to Nowhere, which is very offensive to us Grimsby fans, actually. But look, pretty much is nowhere the way we're going, bottom of the league, going to oblivion at the end of this season. But on a serious note, yeah, suicides. Talk us through this one, Neil, because it's so blooming sad. Just talk us through what your article's really pushing forward.
For those that don't know it, the Humber Bridge is a really magnificent structure. I think it's probably one of the it's probably the largest bridge in the UK. Is that right, David?
It's massive. It's a huge journey over it. Yeah.
Yeah, and when you drive over it, you feel like you're up in the sky and that there's nothing around you, because a lot of bridges are built sort of near to towns and cities. This one is just kind of seems to be in the middle of nowhere, and you go up in the sky and it's very, very high up.
Yeah.
And what's happened is they've closed off the pedestrian the foot part of the bridge. They've closed it off, because there's always been people that have committed suicide at the Humber Bridge. But there's been a surge in cases recently. And when there were 6 in just 1 month, so Professor Roger Watson, who wrote the article with me on Lockdown Skeptics today, he calculated that the average number of suicides since the bridge opened in 1981 is sort of 5 or 6 a year, and there were 6 in just 1 month, and there may be more than 6. That's not the total that's not a total since the beginning of the year. That was just one month. 6 known suicides, and what struck Roger, who lives in Hull, was the lack of coverage of this in the local media. And this is something which has been going on throughout this COVID tyranny, is that some terrible things are happening to people, physical and mental health. Terrible things are happening, and they are obviously caused by lockdown and the related restrictions on our ability to live our lives. People who have been, savagely economically destroyed, the social damage caused by lockdowns, it's devastating.
I mean, because
so what we have at the Humber Bridge is we simply have a place where there's a high enough building that people can get onto and jump off. And so now they've tried to stop people from doing that by blocking off the footpath, and cyclists now have to book in advance to cross the bridge. But when this was done, when this rule came in that you could no longer cross the Humber Bridge on foot, there was no acknowledgement that this is because of the tragic circumstances of lockdown. The Hull Daily Mail doesn't want to know. People don't want to know about any terrible adverse consequences of lockdown. The people are acting as though COVID trumps anything else. And if you're complaining about people committing suicide, just like if you complain about the possible adverse reactions of the vaccines, then you're not on board. You're in some way antisocial. You're a conspiracy theorist. But these are real lives. These are real people. This will be somebody's father, somebody's son, and in some cases women too, but it's mostly male.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I spoke to someone today, a younger person today, probably in their 20s, early 30s, And one thing they said to me was that if there's another lockdown, and there's going to be, like, they're pretty much almost at the end of their tether, because it can be people we all have different individual family circumstances. People may be living on their own. People have lost their job. There's all kinds of psychological stuff going in people's minds. And what gets someone to the end of to a bridge like that, and the huge, I can still remember the drop, going down. I'm surprised anybody survives it. I see the small number of people survive. I don't know how that can be, but I suppose if anything's possible. But the disturbance that must happen in your mind, you've got to be pushed literally to the edge, to go to the edge. And as you say, media aren't interested because somebody somewhere sneezed in Lincolnshire. It's unbelievable, isn't it?
And there are a few more articles now that you see in the media about the mental health toll of COVID. It's usually the toll of COVID rather than something caused by lockdown. But what was very noticeable to me as a mental health researcher was, in fact, just before COVID struck, I was doing some research on media coverage of the so-called mental health crisis in younger people. Now, younger people, adolescents, it's a difficult time in life, and there are always people that have mental health problems. But this was being bigged up by the media for about 10 years or more.
Yeah.
The mental health crisis in younger people, schools and universities, lots of resources going in. As a university lecturer, I was, it was almost like I was going back to my psychiatric nursing, what I was expected to do with students.
Yeah.
But the media were shouting loud about this. They cried wolf. They cried wolf because now we have a genuine mental health crisis. And what's happened? What's happened to the media interest? Worse so is what's happened to the mental health professionals, the mental health practitioners.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why aren't they speaking out? There are a few. There's a few, but it's like the rest of the health professions. They are complicit. They haven't exercised their duty of care. They haven't spoken out because their job, their career is more important than people jumping off the Humber Bridge.
Yep. And that's pretty much, where Britain is in April 2021. We have, but so much of it flows from the auspices of the government and the fear that it's put in those. For example, I know people in the NHS who are good people and who see things exactly for what they are, and they know the minute they speak out, if they, and some of them do, but they suffer because of it, and some of them lose their jobs and they've got mortgages and families and all that responsibility.
Yeah.
And so the malevolence comes from government. Like even today, Neil, we had the media, the casual assertion, we've discovered that 23% of so-called COVID deaths aren't COVID deaths. And I checked the BBC news portal, and it didn't cover it. What? So what? So that's only about, I think that's about 40,000 people knocked off the 150,000 death toll. And here in Northern Ireland, by the way, even more entertainingly, it's 38%. And by the way, I'm not sure I believe those figures either, but this is YouTube.
No. I mean, if you're a real skeptic, if you're really following what's going on here, then that 25% is a small admission. Yeah. It's like, do you remember, David, last year when they cut the time period from I think it was 6 months PCR test, you anything you died of, you went down as COVID. I think it was something like 6 months, ridiculous. And they cut it down to 28 days. But even that, 28 days, I mean, you should be on your death certificate. The cause of death should be what you actually died of, not whether you had a PCR test, which of course is entirely dubious anyway.
And that's caused a lot of distress. I've had people speak to me, and their loved ones have died of usually cancers or heart cardiac events. But the death certificate comes along and boom, it's a COVID death. And the grief that's caused, I mean, bad enough to lose someone. And you know that, you remember your dad's dying of cancer. And then you get the death cert and, oh, COVID-19. And you're just going, what? And the medical people are not listening to you. That's just the way it is. It's shocking. It's absolutely shocking. The absolute state of this country, I never, ever thought it would be.
Yes.
We get to this, you know.
The thing is, so, David, it's not just this country. I mean, we should be concerned first and foremost with what's going on here in the UK. Of course we will be. And we might take an interest in what's going on in Ireland as well. But this is going on across the world.
Yeah, global.
And you can see the same language. It's like the same script is being used wherever you go. Now, here, just one example of this is Jonathan Van Tan, the government's medical advisor.
Yeah.
When it became clear that the AstraZeneca vaccines were getting too much of a bad press and they were being sort of banned or withheld from use, certain age groups in countries all around the world, Jonathan Van Tan said that they're going to have a course correction, as if you're like sailing, you know, I think he made the analogy himself. If you're sailing, you know, there's different ways you go depending on the wind and that sort of thing. Yeah. But you still go to the same, you're still ending up with the same destination, but a course correction. And that same phrase, which is an unusual phrase, it's not something that we would, you know, every day think of. That same phrase was used the same day in Australia about something else. But it's about COVID, but about something else.
Yeah.
So you can see how stock phrases are being used, that they've worked out the behavioral psychology, because not just in Britain that we've got behavioral psychology. This is a global project of changing the way people see things.
You're absolutely right. You're quite right. And there was a great example of that. In the past 24 hours, we had Boris, having spent months grooming people to take the vaccines. He suddenly declares, oh, by the way, it's lockdown that's doing the heavy lifting, not vaccines. And then, lo and behold, in the same 24-hour news cycle across the pond over in Canada, we've got Justin Trudeau saying exactly the same.
That's an even better example that you've just given. And of course, Boris Johnson's comments yesterday caused some concern.
Yes.
Caused some uproar even, because, you know, people were sold the vaccine as the passport to freedom. And wait a minute, here's Boris Johnson saying that it was lockdown that reduced the instance of COVID. Not the vaccine. Of course, you and I know, David, that neither lockdown nor these so-called vaccines are the answer. But people were sold that, and you know, we've got a vast number of people given these vaccines, AstraZeneca or Pfizer, in Britain, and people took these vaccines. Mostly, they were thinking that it was something they should do, something that you know would possibly prevent them from getting seriously ill, but also might protect others. People did it in good faith. I think they were very wrong. I don't think they were in a position of making informed consent. They weren't told, or they didn't look enough to see that these interventions are part of an experimental trial that run for another 2 years or so. But you know, I think people mostly did it in good faith, and now they see Boris pulling the rug from underneath them. Now, what happens next? Well, what was Boris thinking when he said that? Because Boris, of course, is characterized as a buffoon, is characterized as someone who's, you know, totally unreliable and doesn't know. You don't know what's going to come out of his mouth from one day to the next. No, Boris is told what to say.
Yep,
he would have been told to say that.
Yeah.
So I think there's two things going on there. One is that they know that the vaccines don't work. Now, I'm sorry if this gets you kicked off YouTube, David, but look, the evidence is quite clear that every country that's introduced these vaccines has had a surge in COVID cases after the vaccine. Now, that could just be a short-term effect, the lowered immunity. But then they started to talk about variants again. Now, back if you remember at the end of last year, they were talking about the Kent variant, and then there was a South African variant. And
That's right.
Now they're talking variants again. They're talking variants again, and I think there's an admission there, or I think that it's an unsustainable thing to say that the vaccines are wholly effective when they clearly are not. So I think that's going on. But secondly, excuse me. Secondly, I think they need another lockdown. They've got very, very far with their agenda. And why stop now? You know, well, why when they're making such progress with the Great Reset? Why stop now? But to get to the next level,
Yep.
they will need another lockdown. And what the next lockdown will do is it will be a very, very strong message to any refuseniks out there that you may still not be compelled to take the vaccine, but it will be made very clear that you're an antisocial danger, you're a biohazard, and that you should be stopped from going anywhere. And everyone else is getting locked down because of you, because of your selfishness.
Yeah. I feel exactly. I think that, I mean, other people, and again, with a degree of appreciation for the fact this is YouTube, we're on amongst others. You know, if, for example, there was to be a resurgence of virus for whatever reason, I think the people who are going to be blamed for it, it's not going to be the manufacturers, because anyway, they've got indemnity, but it's going to be us. It's absolutely going to be us. That's when the yellow stars are going to be really sewing on, whether we like it or not. That's when the restrictive practice. So they're going to give a punishment beating to the compliant, which is, I'm not sure what percentage of the population that is, but it's a big chunk of it. They're going to give them the punishment beating, and they're going to blame you and me and the people on the stream.
That's right. That's exactly it.
And they're going to smash more of us then. So the resistance is then going to be further reduced, isn't it? So that, well, they hope so anyway. I'm not sure, because I think at this point, if you're still on board the resistance, you're staying on board the resistance. I think. Well, might be wrong.
But there's all kinds of things that they can do, David. Let's be honest. I mean, it's not just about what we think. You know, we may think that this COVID regime is tyrannical and farcical and so wrong and so unethical in so many ways. We may think that, but we can still be forced to go along with it. So, you know, anyone that says, well, look, I've just been carrying on my life as normal for the last year, that's not true. They haven't been able to do things like go to pubs, for example. Now, the government could do all kinds of things. So just today, they're talking about making it compulsory for care home staff to take these experimental vaccines, which, you know, is abhorrent. You know, I mean, a lot of these staff are women of child rearing age as well.
Yeah, of course they are. Yeah,
these are experimental vaccines. They do not need it. If you look at the flu vaccine, that's never been mandatory. You can argue that it's a good thing for the elderly to take, but staff have never been expected. There are parts of the world, like in some places in America, where staff have to take the flu vaccine. They haven't done it in the UK.
Yeah,
and part of the reason for that is that the flu vaccines are so ineffectual. I mean, there are some years where, it's only about 25-30% effective.
Mm.
And the COVID vaccines, I think the effectiveness is even less than that. They've been trying to develop a coronavirus vaccine for decades and never managed to do it.
I know.
So
Oh, I know. Yeah.
people are being forced or coerced into taking a vaccine which doesn't even work.
So Chris, on the stream here, Chris Davis asked the question for me to ask you: what do you think there will be a public tipping point? Will there be a Boris poll tax moment? Do you think? And if there is, what is that? What will that be? Do you think?
I've always said since the start of this, as soon as I realized that a large proportion of the public were not with us, they decided to go with the government and to believe the narrative, and so we were up against it. We were a minority from the outset. That minority has grown. There's no doubt at all that the resistance is gradually increasing. And you can see that, for example, on the comments on the Daily Mail website.
Mm-hmm.
So are we approaching a tipping point?
Yeah.
And what I've always said since the outset is that when the tipping point comes, it won't be predictable. It won't be expected. It will be like the day the Berlin Wall came down. On that very day, that wasn't predicted to happen, right? And I think that this is what's going to happen with COVID. I think there'll be somewhere in the world, in Europe, maybe, hopefully, in the UK, where where something major will happen that will turn the people against the regime. And when it happens in one big country or in some significant way somewhere, then there'll be like a domino effect. I can't say. I would love to be able to predict that, yeah, there's going to be a tipping point, next big rally, 24th of April, which hopefully would be a good one, a big one. But is that going to be the tipping point? Probably not. Probably not. But what it will be is a good, strong demonstration of how many people are not complying with the regime. Tipping points, by their nature in history, are impossible to predict. You'd have to be, you're looking into a crystal ball.
I mean, I agree with you, by the way, completely. And Chris, to your question, I think it's something we won't know till it happens. I think it'll be something small as well. It might be like, for example, I don't know, you got there's a cup final, I think, where the government's letting in 2,000 fans into, 100,000 capacity Wembley. Maybe that'll piss off people so much. Maybe it'll be something like that, or maybe, I don't know what it will be, but you're right. Tipping point, but there can be that tipping point in history. So you're dead right in that, and maybe that's the hope that we have. Those of us who are resistant. Yeah. The other hope, I see it in social media as well. I do see a lot of the normies, so to speak, the people, the normies in the middle, and you can see some of them begin to move a bit more to our side, fundamentally because they're being betrayed time and time again, as we've discussed, by government. And eventually, for some of them, they do think there's something wrong here. Another damn good reason why they don't want people going to the pub, by the way, as we said at the beginning of tonight, because you would have conversations like this, like you and I are having, and like the guys in the stream, these are the conversations that must not happen.
I mean, just going back to your caller's question.
Yeah.
While I can't predict when the tipping point will be, I'm sure it will happen. I'm absolutely sure it will happen. I think this regime will eventually collapse. And when it collapses, it will collapse suddenly. And what needs to happen is that the perpetrators of these crimes against humanity
Yep.
need to be rounded up as soon as possible. If you look at what happened in Germany after the Second World
Yeah,
War,
48.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
Germany had the shame of what happened under the Nazis. But what gave them closure, some amount of closure at least, was that we had the Nuremberg trial.
Mm-hmm.
And the main instigators of this tyranny were severely punished.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
think this is what's going to happen is that, and let's be clear, the people running the show at the moment know that if they take the foot off the pedal, if unless they keep going with this, they can't just sit back because people will come onto them. There'll be a wave of vengeance, and they're determined to keep their power, keep the momentum going. But if we get that tipping point, if the people do revolt and overturn this tyranny, then there will need to be swift justice so that we can show our children and grandchildren that people that do very evil things get the consequences of their actions.
Well, there's no more I need add to that other than completely to agree with you in that one. And the sooner Nuremberg 2 comes, the better. I think Matt Hancock might find it hard getting a character witness, but nonetheless, there are always these things that we can hopefully see happen, because just as we've talked about the COVID tyranny is a global thing. I think the resistance is also a global thing. I saw a statistic. We're going to finish shortly, but just a couple of quick things. I did see a statistic that in the States, something like about 40% or a big chunk of people serving in uniform in the States had refused the vaccines. These guys didn't want it. So there's always hope, isn't there? I don't like to leave people despondent thinking it's all over.
Well, there's a very large proportion of the Black and Asian communities in London and other cities in England where there's a distrust of the vaccine.
Yes.
And
yeah.
I think this is going to be a big problem for the government. A lot of those people work in the public sector. A lot of them work in care homes.
Yep.
And I hope that our Black and Asians fellow citizens can persist with their distrust, because they've got every right, every justification to distrust the government. I just feel very sad that so many British people have just abandoned all their critical faculties, including some highly intelligent people who just seem to have I mean, I know someone who believes that the 9/11 Twin Towers thing was an inside job, right? Okay, it's a kind of conspiracy theory. Some people believe in it. He believes that, but he can't see that the government is up to anything with COVID. And I know that this is something which is very typical. People around the country just scratching their heads at friends that they thought who were very questioning just seem to be lapping this up.
Final question. We wrap up after this one. Do you think that the more media, mainstream media, people have been consuming sitting at home on furlough or otherwise, do you think that that's been a big factor, Neil, in getting them to this point of like robotic-like obedience to the regime?
Yes. Well, you go back to agenda, the agenda. Sorry, not the agenda. The event 201. Event 201.
Yep. Yep.
Where they modelled a global, pandemic, which actually happened a couple of months later. And one of the main things that they said would have to be done is that the governments would need to take control of the media, and that this would be vital, because otherwise you would have all kinds of dangerous disinformation. And that a recognition also at Event 201 that the media is not just the traditional, the sort of legacy
Media,
outlets, the
yeah,
newspapers and the
yeah,
broadcasters. A lot of the media now is online, shows such as this. These would need to be controlled to stop. And this is exactly what's been going on. So there's been two main things, main kind of strategies. One is the legacy media have been bought.
100%. Yep.
Yeah, they've been bought, and you know there's blatant sort of advertising stuff by the government that pays for them, but they're being told what to say. Editors are effectively under something akin to a D notice. They're told that this is what you must write. You must not deviate from this path. So that's going on. The second thing that's going on is, as we know, this is a global thing. It's not just UK, and the global big tech companies are increasingly exercising censorship on anything which threatens the narrative. So these two things have been going on, and they were planned. You know, back in Event 201, that desktop exercise, I think it was in New York where it was done, the World Economic Forum that organized it. This was all planned. That this was massively important to the strategy. If you want to change people's behavior, get the media to do it.
Well, yeah, and I think, you know, that on that note, we finish it. So two big points out of this one, I think. Number one, let's hope we hit a tipping point. Let's hope that people, in whichever way it'll happen, do kind of see exactly what we see. And failing that, I think we will next be convening in Florida, Fort Lauderdale, some nice bars along the front there. We could go there. Yeah. So it's got to be there's got to be hope and optimism, I think, as well as a sense of understanding where we are. Look, it's been a real pleasure to have you on the stream again, and it'll not be. Hopefully you'll come back, and it won't just be quite as long, because things are moving apace. And as you say, here we are in April. I don't know how we're going to get to the summer. There's going to be stuff happen, 100% guaranteed. And I hope, Niall, you come back and join us, and we can chat about whatever that is. And, you know, whenever...
It's been, in some ways, despite all the awful things that's been going on, it's been a very positive time as well. We've built networks of people that we realize that think the same way as us. And we're all doing our own bit. You know, whether it's you running your show, David, you know, me writing articles, the people tuning in tonight, everyone's doing their bit in their own way. And that's all we can do. Just keep chipping away. And we will be able to proudly say, in 10, 20 years' time or more, we'll be able to say, Daddy, what did you do in the war? Yeah. And we can say that we were freedom fighters.
Well, yeah, and on that positive note, thank you very much for being on the stream.
Thank you, David.
Thank you all very much for your comments. Thanks for the super chat, and look forward to seeing you all on Friday evening, 8 p.m, when Alana Mercer is back to me. And on Friday night, we're going to talk about, drumroll, vaccine passports, particularly with an American perspective. I think you'll find it very interesting. So anyway, that's it for me, and catch up with you folks real soon. Thanks very much. Thank you, Niall, for being here.
Cheers.
Bye, everyone.
Bye all.
See you then.
Bye all. Bye all.